All right, folks, I'm going to get started. Welcome back. Welcome to the second to last time we're going to meet before the final. So really just two more times after today. So that's pretty exciting, hopefully, for everybody. It is exciting for me. But I know you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, and I also have a lot of work ahead of me, but not until you guys are done with your work. The grading of the papers, the grading of the finals, calculating final grades, it's a lot of work. But you guys certainly have a lot to do between now and the very end. So make sure that you don't kind of shy away from it. You're not kind of trying to block out the reality of the situation. You are all in on it. You are ready to take it on. You are planning ahead. You know exactly what's coming up, deadlines, how much work, how much extra time you have. You've got a plan, and you are all about executing that plan. And if you do that, things are going to work out for you, and you're going to get some good grades. You're going to wind up having a really good summer, unless you're taking 3 classes during the summer. You'll still have a good summer. But yeah, it's all about these next couple of weeks and being completely dedicated to just doing anything you can to make sure that things turn out well. So don't drop the ball. This is it. There's no more opportunities after this. All right, so as far as the class goes, the paper is due next week. Like I mentioned before, I need both the hard copy and the digital copy turned in. The hard copy you can turn in to me at the latest by the end of class next week, but you can turn it in prior to that, either in my office hours. You can slide it under my door anytime. Just make sure that you write on it 3:08 Tuesday nights, so that I know that is when that's where the paper belongs, because I have different classes turning in papers. I'll have a lot of papers, so I just need to make sure that I know who's who. Yeah. Yeah. So it's already been open. I think the option's there. So yeah, just anytime. But yeah, the hard copy turn it into me next Tuesday or anytime before then if you want. Slide it under my door, come to my office hours, whatever. So just make sure that happens, or it will severely hurt your grade. If I don't get both of them, you get immediate cut of 50% on the grade. So just keep that in mind. Mini papers. I think the last one is due tonight or something. And beyond that, all options are off the table. So I'll be starting to give credit for those at some point, but it'll all happen at once. So if I have time, I'm going to go through. But if I don't, you'll at least get the credit when I grade the papers and upload those grades. So you'll have all your grades on mini papers and the final paper by the time you take the final, probably the weekend before. But I've got about 150 papers to go through. So don't expect it sooner, expect it later. Was there a question? No, we're done with mini papers. There's only the open chapter and then the one from last week, and that was it. Because this week needs to be about finalizing the paper, not writing new papers.
Open chapter closes tonight.
No, it closed on Sunday night. Yeah. And remember, if you turn in a mini paper but it does not meet the 2-page threshold, then you will not get credit for it. So just keep that in mind as well. That I go through them, I check them out. I've been going through some today. Some guy had super big font and three line spacing between. It's just come on, I'm not an idiot. I know you didn't write an actual paper. I'm not giving that guy any credit for any of his papers. So just don't pull anything, or I hope you didn't pull anything. And if you did pull something, own it. Accept that you made a mistake and you're not getting credit for your paper. And that's that. So anyway, the actual paper, again, it's not hard to throw it together. So just put your 3 mini papers together, give them a read, write an introduction. I'm a manager of this firm. These are the things that are happening in my firm based on the case. These are the 3 observations I've made. Summarize each. It shouldn't take more than a page to do that. That's your introduction. Three sections of the paper are basically your mini papers. Subtitle them, whatever, so that it's clear. Write a sentence at the end and start so that there's a flow. and then you just write a conclusion that mirrors the introduction, and then you're done. And if you've written the mini papers already, then it shouldn't take you more than like an hour or two to get that done. So, like I've been saying, it's better to get it done sooner rather than later. So I hope you guys are doing that and get it done. Yeah.
Is it a maximum base number?
No. There's a minimum 2,500 word requirement, and beyond that, no. Like, so that's why I need the digital copy so I can check the word count. Yeah.
Are we able to turn in the hard copy this week?
So I mentioned it before you got here that you can turn it into me anytime before Tuesday, but either during my office hours or just slide it under my door. But you have to write on it 3:08 Tuesday night so I know where it goes. I do not want papers today. Yeah. All right. Any questions about anything? Yeah. No. You don't have to. No. I mean, if you want to do a cover sheet, you can, but it's not a requirement. Just make sure that you do write that you are in this particular section of 308 so that I know, because I have more than one 308. Other questions? All right. So we've got two chapters left. We're going to cover one chapter today, and we're going to cover one next week. So the chapter today is on pricing strategies for firms with market power. We've been talking about firms with market power for a while now. Started at the end of the second section of the course, where we talked about the decisions that firms make in monopolies and in monopolistically competitive markets. Since that time, we've been talking about oligopolies, markets in which there are a few firms that have large market shares, and they share the market, and it's complicated because there's interdependence, and that makes their decision making not as clear cut as it would be in a monopoly or a perfectly competitive market, and also monopolistically competitive market. So, we covered 2 different chapters worth of theory, sort of trying to, kind of clarify how we might find some certainty in the uncertainty, which is like what that context is laden with. So now we're going to look at different strategies, different situations that firms that have market power sort of encounter, need to be addressed, because it's either something having to do with the ability of the firm to charge a price above their marginal cost, or it has something to do with like their internal pricing structure, which we'll talk about. But the first issue we'll talk about is how maybe like a firm that is small and doesn't have the resources to estimate, cost functions and demand functions, how a firm like that might be able to go about at least kind of ballparking some of the conclusions that we've gotten from our analysis with respect to pricing and quantity, so that they might be able to have the ability to get to some kind of conclusion similar to what like a big firm might get if they were to hire economic consultants or have their own department that deals with the kind of economic analysis you would need to be able to figure the things out we've been talking about. So there's some tools presented here that help like small businesses kind of try to achieve the same sort of efficiency in their pricing, etc. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about then strategies that yield even greater profits, the ability of firms to capture consumer surplus, some of the consumer surplus that exists in markets, that again is excess willingness to pay. You've got consumers that are willing to pay more generally than the price being charged, and so firms are interested in obviously taking that as profit, getting as close as possible to charging each person what they are willing to pay. So we'll look at some strategies that they use to accomplish that. So extracting consumer surplus from consumers is the first one we'll look at. Then pricing strategies for special cost and demand structures. And then finally, pricing strategies in markets with intense price competition, like in the Bertrand oligopoly case, in which the firms do wind up battling each other on price and ending up basically undercutting each other to the point where they're charging their marginal cost. So again, just a bunch of kind of ancillary issues related to what we've been talking about to kind of just highlight some of the other sort of ways that we can go about optimizing the market given the knowledge that we've established. But everything that we've done is relevant in this chapter, and so you can't understand the stuff in this chapter without going through everything we've gone through. And then finally in chapter 12 of next week, we'll deal with information issues, because we have been assuming that everybody has perfect information, and that is not the case in reality. And so we'll deal with some issues related to the lack of certainty that exists, the imperfect information, and how firms might go about kind of, circumventing those issues. All right, so let's start with basic pricing strategies. So the most basic pricing strategy used by firms with market power is to charge a single price to all consumers. Basically that price corresponds to the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So just a quick review of that very basic but common approach we've been taking. Suppose there's an inverse demand for a firm's product given by 10 minus 2Q, and a cost function given by 10 plus 2Q. The question is, what is the profit maximizing level of output and the price for this firm? All right, so simple, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? What's the marginal revenue here? This firm has market power, so 10 minus 4Q is marginal revenue. What is the marginal cost? It's not 10, it's 2 yet. It is 2, the derivative of our cost function with respect to quantity. So again, setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Doing a little bit of algebra, yields, in this case, an optimal amount, a profit maximizing amount to be 2 units. And to get the profit maximizing price, you just plug that into the inverse demand function and you get the price. So something we've done a lot, and it's a very simple, straightforward approach if you have this demand function and this cost function, which you may not always have. We talked about in chapter 3 how this inverse demand function can be estimated. And you do that if you have data for the market. You're going to have price quantity combinations that you can throw into an Excel sheet, run a regression, and you can estimate a demand function, and then that can serve as at least one of your tools. And then the cost functions can also be estimated. You again need different cost quantity combinations, so you need data to be able to do that. Data can be generated, it can be purchased. There's ways of getting data, but data can also be expensive, so that may not also work as well. So let's look at just ways that firms can maybe try to ballpark some of these prices and quantities that maximize their profits without having this type of very sort of sophisticated information. So let's look at a simple pricing rule for firms that are either monopolies or exist in monopolistically competitive markets in which the firms compete against each other, but have some market power. So they are in what's called imperfect competition. So in instances where a manager has estimates of the demand and cost function for the firm's product, calculation of the profit maximizing price is straightforward, as we just saw. In some cases, a manager, though, lacks access to these estimates. Given minimal information about demand and cost, though, a manager can do a reasonably good job of determining what price to charge for a product without the demand and cost functions. Most retailers, for example, have a rough estimate of the marginal cost of each item sold. So the manager of a clothing store knows how much the store pays the supplier for each pair of jeans. And so that can be thought of as like crude information about the marginal cost of selling the jeans. It's crude because the cost of the firm of selling the jeans does not include the cost of the sales force. So remember, marginal cost is both is dependent on fixed and variable costs, and so you would need all that information to estimate marginal cost. But again, like if you don't have all that sophisticated information, you can just kind of say, well, each additional pair of jeans that I buy costs me this much, and that is like an estimate of your marginal cost. The clothing store manager also has some crude information about the elasticity of demand for jeans at its store. So small firms can obtain some information about demand and cost from publicly available information. This is a table that we looked at in chapter 7, or chapter, yeah, it was chapter 7, when we looked at structure, conduct, and performance, and we looked at the Rothschild index. Anyway, this is information that gave us elasticities for the entire industries, as well as the elasticity for like the representative firm in those industries. And obviously, as we mentioned before, the demand tends to be more elastic for an individual firm than the industries themselves. This type of information you can get from the National Bureau of Economic Research, the government's sort of economic research wing. And that information is publicly available. You can do searches online for the website and find this type of information. So you can get the elasticities from those kind of sources. In the absence of better information, the manager of a clothing store can use this estimate to approximate the elasticity of demand for jeans sold at his or her store. The key is to recall the relation between the elasticity of demand for a firm's product and marginal revenue, which we derived in chapter 8. We also talked about it, I think it was in chapter 3. All right, so the formula, the marginal revenue for a firm with market power. The marginal revenue for a firm with market power is given by the price times 1 plus the elasticity of the firm over the elasticity of the firm. So this is a way that that we can relate elasticity to marginal revenue, and it turns out that this relationship can, again, be used to kind of ballpark the information that a firm needs to be able to set their profit maximizing price. So again, E to the F, E subscript F is the own price elasticity of demand for the firm's product, and P is the price charged. Since the profit maximizing level of output is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, this formula implies that this term also equals marginal cost at the profit maximizing price. So again, the small business owner can have an idea of what the marginal cost is, so they can throw that in here, and then they can throw in here those estimates from the information that they gain from like government sources. So at the profit maximizing level of output, this relationship holds. If we solve the relationship for price, we can obtain the profit maximizing price for a firm with market power to be price equals, so we basically move this term to the right by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal, and therefore price equals marginal cost times the own price elasticity of the firm over 1 plus the own price elasticity of the firm. So again, information that can be gotten from sources that don't require you to go out and pay for economic consultants to estimate functions for you. This tells us that the price that maximizes profits is some number K times the marginal cost, where K is equal to that term in parentheses. So K equals E to the F times 1 plus E to the F. The number K can be viewed as the profit maximizing markup factor. Again, the proportion which the firm increases the price over marginal cost. We talked about in chapter 7 how the firms that are in less competitive settings will be charging a price closer to marginal cost, if not actual marginal cost, if they are in a perfectly competitive setting or in a Bertrand oligopoly. As there are less firms and the market becomes less competitive, they're able to charge a higher price above the marginal cost, and so this term will become bigger. For the case of the clothing store manager, the manager's best estimate of the elasticity of demand is negative 4.1. So plugging that into our markup factor, we wind up with 1.32. So based, again, on the elasticity of demand for an individual firm in the market for clothing, the firm can then sort of ballpark what their price should be, and it should be about 30% more than the marginal cost, the extra cost of supplying an additional garment. So in this instance, the profit maximizing price is, again, 1.32 times the marginal cost. So a manager should know two important things about this pricing rule. One is that the more elastic the demand for the firm's product, the lower the profit maximizing markup. So if you remember what elasticity means, it's basically sensitivity of consumers to price changes. If demand is very elastic, people are very sensitive to price changes. If price changes a little bit, they will change their quantity demanded by a lot. And so the reason for that is because there are likely a lot of substitutes available for the good in the market. And if the price goes up for the one that they're buying, they can jump ship and buy some other good that's very similar to what they were buying. So again, as the elasticity gets higher, then the more elastic the demand for the firm's product, then this term will start to approach 1. And that means that the price will start to approach marginal cost, and so the markup will be smaller. So again, higher elasticity implies many available substitutes for a product. In the extreme case where you have perfect competition and you have that perfectly elastic demand that's set at the market equilibrium that the individual firm in those markets perceives as their demand because they're price takers and they're incapable of affecting the price. In that case, we have this term essentially equal to 1, and thus price equals marginal cost. So the second thing to notice is that the higher the marginal cost, the higher the profit maximizing price. So that's important because it reflects just basically cost structure. So if you have a overall higher cost of operating than like your rival, any rivals that you might have in the markets, then essentially you're going to be in a situation where your price is going to wind up being higher than theirs, and you won't be able to compete with them. So it's just important to understand that that marginal cost is specific to the individual seller. Other things being equal, other things being the same, firms with higher marginal costs will charge higher prices than firms with lower marginal costs. One caveat to keep in mind is that the elasticity of demand may change when you alter the price of a good or service. So that number that we looked at on that table, it's not one that stays constant if we have linear demand in the market. So you know that at higher prices, demand tends to be more elastic than at lower prices, where it tends to be more inelastic. So a slight increase in the price will lead to a slight increase in the elasticity, which in turn makes the optimal markup slightly lower than that calculated based on the original estimate of the elasticity of demand. So it does kind of complicate the situation. But again, this is about ballparking. It's not about being as precise as possible, but it is good to try to be as precise as one can be given the information given. So it's important to be aware of the fact that elasticity can change if you have linear demand. So for this reason, if you have an estimate of the demand function, so again, if you can just get the demand function estimated via some data that you might be able to get, then you may more accurately determine the profit maximizing price by simply deriving marginal revenue from that, setting equal to marginal cost, and then setting your profit maximizing output and price based on that approach. If the only information available is a numerical estimate of the elasticity of demand, the profit maximizing markup formula may be used to approximate the optimal markup and price. Under certain conditions, this approach exactly yields the optimal markup. And the condition is that the demand be log linear. So we learned in chapter 3 that the elasticity of demand is constant for log linear demand. And therefore, you won't have that issue of the elasticity varying along the demand curve, which could, again, kind of throw out of whack your estimates based on this approach. All right, demonstration problem. The manager of a convenience store competes in a monopolistically competitive market and buys cola from a supplier at a price of $1.25 per liter. So that's essentially their marginal cost. The manager thinks that because there are several supermarkets nearby, the demand for cola sold at her store is slightly more elastic than the elasticity for the representative food store reported in chapter 7 as negative 3.8. So again, like that information is public information. It's very sort of generic. This person took that information and then assumed, well, I do have a little bit more competition in my area, so I'm going to increase the elasticity slightly. So based on this information, she perceives that the elasticity of demand for cola sold by her store should be around -4. The question is, what price should the manager charge for a liter of cola to maximize profits? So using the pricing rule for a monopolistically competitive firm, the profit maximizing price is, of course, equal to marginal cost times the firm own price elasticity of demand over 1 plus the elasticity of the demand of the firm. So we've got 1.25 is the marginal cost. Elasticity is equal to -4. Plugging in this information gets us to a price of $1.25 times 133, which is equal to 167. So the price is $1.67. That will, again, maximize profits given the limited information of this convenience store owner has. All right, so that, again, applies to monopolies and monopolistically competitive firms. A simple pricing rule for Kuno oligopoly winds up being very similar. So again, Kuno oligopoly was one of the oligopolies we talked about in the last chapter. Recall that there are a few firms in the market servicing many consumers. This is actually in chapter 9. The firms produce either the same product or slightly different versions, either differentiated or homogeneous products. And each firm believes that rivals will hold their output constant if it changes its own output, which is sort of the defining assumption for the Kuno setting. The firms are understood to be competing on selecting quantities, and so they're sharing the market, so they basically have to take the other firm's quantity choice as constant and then look at the residual demand that remains for them and then kind of optimize their behavior based on that. But as we know, that leads to a decision rule, which is the reaction function, in which the firm's output becomes a function of their rival's output, and it allows them to set that profit maximizing level, taking into consideration what rivals are doing. We also saw how to calculate the profit maximizing price and quantity given information about demand and cost curves. Recall that this procedure requires full information about the demand and cost of all firms in the industry, which obviously is not something that can easily be gotten. The demand would be the same for all the firms, but the cost of other firms, you can simply assume that they have the same cost structures, given that this is an oligopoly setting. One of the big sort of barriers to entry that limits competition is increasing returns to scale, which means that they have decreasing average cost in the long run. In order to be in those industries, you've got to be big in order to be able to have a competitive advantage. And so it's a safe assumption by most firms in these industries to assume that their rivals have similar cost structures. But again, if one does not have all this information precisely, the simple pricing rule in the last section can be altered for managers working in a Kuno oligopoly. So suppose the industry consists of, let's say, N Kuno oligopolists, some number N, generally that will be between 2 and 8, roughly, each having identical cost structures and producing similar products. So in the case of a Kuno oligopoly, the profit maximizing markup for Kuno oligopoly is going to be this expression here. So if there are N identical firms in a Kuno oligopoly, the profit maximizing price for a firm in this market will be equal to, again, marginal cost times a markup factor, which is very similar to the markup factor we just saw for monopoly and monopolistically competitive firms, where in this case, N is the number of firms in the industry, and E subscript M is the market elasticity of demand, and marginal cost is, of course, just marginal cost. So this pricing rule has a simple justification. When firms are in a Kuno oligopoly and they sell identical products, the elasticity of demand for the individual firm's product is going to be N times the market elasticity of demand. So again, as there are more firms in the industry, the individual firm elasticity will become bigger. It will become more sensitive to price changes because there will be a lot of close substitutes. Everybody sells pretty much the same thing. So E to the F, the individual firm elasticity is essentially the market elasticity times the number of firms in the industry. If N equals 1, then there's only one firm in the industry. You've got a monopoly, and the elasticity of demand for that firm's product is the same as the market elasticity of demand. When n equals 2, you've got a Kuno duopoly, and there are two firms in the market, and each firm's elasticity of demand is going to be twice as elastic for the entire market. All right, so the markup formula is thus identical to that presented in the previous section. So again, this is the one in the previous section, so it's basically the exact same thing, but it is taking into account the fact that there are a limited number of firms in the industry, and so the own price elasticity of the firm will vary with respect to how many firms there are in there. So n is the one that is the variable in here that will capture that. So three aspects of the pricing rule for Kuno oligopoly are worth noting. One, the more elastic the market demand, the closer the profit maximizing price is to marginal cost, just like in the last case. As the number of firms increase, the profit maximizing price again will approach marginal cost. So as more and more firms enter these markets, then the market will approach perfect competition, and the price that should be charged is marginal cost. Again, in the limiting case where there are infinitely many firms, n equals infinity, the profit maximizing price is exactly equal to marginal cost because this term will equal 1. The higher the marginal cost, the higher the profit maximizing price once again. All right, quick demonstration problem. Suppose there are three firms and they compete in a homogeneous product Kuno industry. The market elasticity of demand for the product is equal to -2, and each firm's marginal cost is equal to 50. The question is, what is the profit maximizing equilibrium price? All right, so we're going to use the expression we've been working with. Price equals marginal cost times n times the market elasticity over 1 plus n times the market elasticity. So n equals 3, market elasticity equals -2, marginal cost equals 50. Plugging that into our formula, we wind up with P equals 50 times this term here, which winds up equaling $60. So this Kuno oligopolist is able to set their price without having to do all the reaction function stuff and the equilibrium outputs and then plugging those into a demand function, which of course ultimately is very useful and appropriate for a large scale operation. But even though there might be an oligopoly and the firms might have large market shares, it might be a small market overall. So they may not be making that much revenue, even though they do have a large part of the market. Might be some really niche market or something. So again, this is like information that a firm in that situation can use to kind of ballpark the same kind of approach that we've been talking about. All right, so that is sort of the most practical information you've probably gotten so far in the semester, but again, you wouldn't be able to understand it without having gone through everything else we've gone through. But again, another thing to note is, and this is something you should carry with you, is that everything that we're covering, they're very specific general cases of things that could happen out in the actual business environment that you might wind up working in. And these are sort of your starting point to understand how things should work. So it's meant to provide you basic intuition about how things should work given these very perfect circumstances, and then in practice you kind of analyze the situation you're in and then think, okay, these three things are different from the model that we looked at, and so I need to adjust accordingly. That involves creativity, it involves insights you might gain from experience in the market, and it might involve understanding that you might have gained in other classes that may help you sort of maneuver to the best outcome in those situations. So again, all this stuff is not just meant to torture you. It is meant to, again, provide you some basic starting points of understanding how markets operate so that you can then be able to survive out there and thrive if you start your own business or if you wind up managing a firm. All right, let's look at strategies that yield even greater profits. And we've been talking about, again, firms with market power will use that market power to price above their marginal cost, and they will earn profits. Monopolists will earn profits in the long run. Oligopolies will as well. Monopolistically competitive firms and perfectly competitive firms will not, because in the long run, those profits will be eroded. But these firms that do have market power, monopolistically competitive firms, monopolies and oligopolies, can try some of the strategies that we're going to talk about here to capture some consumer surplus that exists in the market as profits. So that's a way for them to, again, enhance more of their profits. So in some markets, managers can enhance profits above those they would earn by simply charging a single per unit price to all consumers. So let's talk about how they can do that by extracting consumer surplus. So the first four strategies are strategies appropriate for firms with various cost structures and degrees of market interdependence. These strategies can enhance profits of firms and industries that are monopolistically competitive, or oligopolistic. All right, so the first approach that they can use is called price discrimination. Some of you have probably come across this term before. We covered in our introductory course. So price discrimination essentially means charging different prices to different consumers for the same thing. There are three basic types of price discrimination. The first is called first-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination. It's what all firms want to do. Essentially, it means that they charge every single person what every single person is willing to pay. Obviously, not the most realistic situation, because A, you have to know what everybody's willing to pay, and then B, you have to somehow be able to charge them that and others different prices. So ideally, a firm would like to engage in first-degree price discrimination, charge each consumer the maximum price that he or she would be willing to pay for each unit of the good purchase. This allows a firm to extract all surplus from consumers and earn the highest possible profits. But of course, it is difficult for a firm to implement this strategy. Some service-related businesses like car dealerships, mechanics, doctors, lawyers successfully do practice a form of first-degree price discrimination. So most car dealers will post a sticker price on cars that is well above the dealer's marginal cost, but offer discounts to consumers on a case-by-case basis, right? So they'll basically set a price and they'll allow the customer to kind of haggle them down to the price that the customer is willing to pay, thereby getting the customers to reveal their willingness to pay, thereby being able to price discriminate in a close manner to perfect price discrimination. The best salespersons are able to size up customers to determine the minimum discount necessary to get them to drive away with the car. So again, it's a very specific type of situation, a car dealership. They post a price, but we all know that those prices are not the prices they're willing to sell at, so we are willing to talk them down. Mechanics have a similar situation. Doctors and lawyers, the same. They don't post their prices. You just kind of go to them and talk to them, and it kind of gets worked out. So any type of situation where you don't have posted prices and you can sort of, have some flexibility with respect to what is actually going to be charged might allow this approach to work. We also see it maybe online as well, digital purchasing systems, Amazon, etc. They could potentially have algorithms that can gauge sort of your willingness to pay for things, maybe based on the kind of things that you buy, how much money you spend on a regular basis. They could kind of massage their way into higher prices by maybe charging you slightly higher prices for things than they would for other people if you do sort of come across as a person that is, maybe of high income based on how much you buy and the things that you buy. So those type of approaches obviously are effective. I'm sure they're actively being used, but I'm sure there's ways of refining those. So there's an area there for people that are interested that can, of course, learn to code and whatnot, to come up with new algorithms that will help firms to extract more consumer surplus and, achieve perfect price discrimination. So let's look at what perfect price discrimination looks like graphically. So here we've got downward sloping demand, and here's the individual firm's marginal cost. Each point on the market demand curve reflects the maximum price that consumers would be willing to pay for each incremental unit of output. So again, a demand curve does reflect a demand schedule, which basically reflects the willingness to pay of all consumers in the market, those that have high to low willingness to pay. Consumers start out with 0 units of the good, and the firm can set the first incremental unit at slightly less than $10 to be able to sell it, because $10 is known as the choke price, the price at which quantity demanded is equal to 0. Since the demand curve slopes downward, the maximum price a firm can charge for each additional unit declines ultimately to $4 at an output of 5 units. Beyond that, any price that people are willing to pay would be below the marginal cost of production, and therefore it wouldn't be of use for the firm to supply that amount. So if the firm set the price at $4, then of course you're going to have all these consumers here that are willing to pay more than $4 that don't have to pay more than $4, and so this triangle will represent that consumer surplus. This shaded area between the demand curve and the firm's marginal cost curve reflects the total contribution to the firm's profit when it charges each consumer the maximum price that she or he are willing to pay for small increments of output between 0 and 5 units. So again, this is both the consumer surplus and the producer surplus, which is profit. And so the firm obviously wants to capture the consumer surplus as well as profit. So under perfect price discrimination, they are able to do that, and thus all of the consumer surplus, as you see, is converted into profit. All right, so again, that is not the most realistic case of price discrimination because, again, it is tricky to achieve it, but not impossible. But a more accessible version of price discrimination is called second-degree price discrimination, and that is the practice of posting a discrete schedule of declining prices for different ranges of quantity. So discrete here means what it's meant, this class, this entire class, doesn't mean like kind of shy. It means like there's a list of very specific numbers that are being set. It's a discrete list of numbers versus a continuous case where you have like a range. So basically, a firm will set a menu of prices. Say, if you buy a small quantity, you will pay this price. If you buy a larger quantity, you pay this price. So again, given a posted schedule of prices, consumers sort themselves by choosing which option they are willing to pay for. Again, according to their willingness to pay for alternative quantities of the good. So suppose the Acme Beverage Company charges consumers $7.60 per case for the first 2 cases and $5.20 for each additional case. So again, those that are only interested in buying 2 cases and are willing to pay the $7.60 will wind up with some consumer surplus. So there'll be some consumer surplus left over. But again, consumer surplus goes all the way down to the price that corresponds to this point here, which was about $4, I think we said. So essentially, there is some consumer surplus that is being captured by the firm doing this. And then, of course, everybody else that wants to pay a lower price will need to buy more. They do. And so then they wind up getting some consumer surplus as well, which is this triangle here. And the firm winds up taking some of their consumer surplus as profit. So they're able to extract some of the consumer surplus as profit. So these 2 bars do represent the contribution to profits under second-degree price discrimination. Again, this is both producer surplus and the consumer surplus that the firms are able to capture, usurp from the consumers. So again, consumers purchasing small quantities, alternatively those having higher marginal valuations, meaning that they have a higher willingness to pay higher prices than those who purchase in bulk. And finally, the third approach to price discriminating is the third-degree price discrimination, which involves charging different prices to different consumers, and they can be separated by area, they can be separated by demographics. So the final type of price discrimination is commonly practiced by firms that recognize that the demand for their product differs systematically across consumers in different demographic groups. So that again, is a form of price discrimination called third-degree price discrimination. Firms can profit by charging different groups of consumers different prices for the same product. It's common for stores to offer student discounts for hotels and restaurants, and to offer senior citizen discounts That's essentially them charging different prices to different groups based on demographics, based on their age. Normal customers get charged the normal price. If you're a student, you get charged a lower price. If you're an elderly person, you get charged a lower price. So third-degree price discrimination. Suppose a firm with market power can charge two different prices to two groups of consumers, and the marginal revenues of selling to Group 1 and Group 2 are MR1 and MR2 respectively. The basic profit maximizing rule to produce output such that marginal revenue equals marginal cost is going to still be valid here, but with a small difference. To maximize profits, the firm should equate the marginal revenue from selling output to each group, to marginal cost. So set marginal revenue from the first group equal to marginal cost, and then marginal revenue from the second group equal to marginal cost, which implies that they are essentially setting the marginal revenues equal to each other. So to see why, suppose that the marginal revenue for the first group is, let's say, 10. So selling an additional unit to the first group will get them $10, and the marginal revenue for selling to the second group is $5. So if one less unit were to be sold to Group 2, then the revenue from that group would fall by $5. If the extra unit of output were sold to Group 1, then revenue would increase by $10. So essentially, they would want to sell to the group that yields the higher marginal revenue. But again, we know that marginal revenue declines. So selling to Group 1 would yield higher marginal revenue first, initially, and then as more and more people are sold items in Group 1, marginal revenue would decrease and eventually would equate to 5, at which point then they're at their optimal. So this allocation continues until the marginal revenues to the two groups are exactly equal. To understand the basis for third-degree price discrimination, suppose that you have two groups of consumers and they have different willingness to pay, which again can be reflected in their elasticity. So you have E1 and E2, and the firm can charge Group 1 a price P1 and Group 2 a price P2. Using the formula for marginal revenue of a firm with market power, it follows that the marginal revenue of selling the product to Group 1 at a price of P1 is, so again, using that formula we derived in the first part of this chapter. So for Group 1, you're going to have the marginal revenue equal to the price charged for that group times 1 plus the elasticity of that group over the elasticity of that group. While the marginal revenue of selling to Group 2 is going to be equal to the price charged to the second group times 1 plus the elasticity of the second group over the elasticity of the second group. As mentioned, the profit maximizing firm should equate the marginal revenue of each group to marginal cost, which implies that marginal revenue in the first group must be equal to the marginal revenue in the second group to optimize, to optimally choose prices across the groups to effectively price discriminate. So if the elasticities are the same, everybody's willingness to pay is basically the same. Their sensitivity to price changes is the same. The term and brackets are equal, and thus the firm will maximize profits by charging each group the same price. In order for third-degree price discrimination to enhance profits, differences must exist in the elasticity of demand of various consumers. So there has to be different sensitivity to price changes amongst the different consumers, like you would find in normal adults versus elderly folks who are on a fixed income, and therefore they are more sensitive to price changes than normal adults that have jobs and have stable incomes. So senior citizens tend to have a more elastic demand for a hotel room or a restaurant meal than other consumers, again, because they have a fixed income and they are not able to spend money on anything they want anytime. So another condition that must be present for this third-degree price discrimination to work is that a firm must have some means of identifying the elasticity of demand by different groups of consumers. So obviously the easiest way is just to kind of ask them. So when we're talking about discounts for senior citizens, obviously you just check their IDs. And for students, you can check their student discount, their student IDs. Also, no type of price discrimination will work if the consumers purchasing at the lower price can resell their purchases to individuals being charged a higher price. So if there is opportunity for arbitrage, buy low, sell high, then third degree price discrimination falls out the door, because again, the one buying the good at the lower price can sell it to the one paying the normal price at a lower price, try to undercut them, which means that the seller of the good will have to lower their price to compete against that, which means that eventually the price will be competed down to the price being charged by the low price payer, and therefore the price would be the same across all groups. So again, those consumers charge lower prices can undercut the price the firm is charging the other group, thus reducing the firm's profits. All right, quick demonstration problem to show how this all works. You are the manager of a pizzeria that produces at a marginal cost of $6 per pizza. The pizzeria is a local monopoly on campus. There's no other restaurants or food stores within 500 miles of campus. During the day, only students eat at the restaurant. In the evening, while students are studying, faculty members eat there. If students have an elasticity of demand for pizza of -4, and the faculty has an elasticity of demand of -2, the question is, what should your pricing policy be to maximize profits? So again, like students make less money, so they're going to be more sensitive to price changes than faculty who have stable incomes. So assuming faculty would be unwilling to purchase cold pizza from students, so we're going to assume that the ability to buy low, sell high does not exist, arbitrage does not exist here. That means that we can engage in a third degree price discrimination scheme here. The conditions for effective price discrimination do hold. It will be profitable to charge one price for lunch, the PL, effectively the student price, and another price, PD, on the dinner menu, the faculty price. The conditions for profit maximization require that the marginal revenue of selling a pizza to each group equal marginal costs. So using the third degree price discrimination rule, this means that here we've got the lunch price, and we multiply that times 1 plus the elasticity of the lunch crowd, which is the student elasticity, set that equal to marginal cost. And of course, you've got the price for the dinner crowd, which is the faculty, multiply times 1 plus their elasticity of demand over the elasticity of demand, set that equal to marginal cost as well. Using both of these formulas, the firm can derive the prices to charge each group. So again, setting the dinner crowd elasticity equal to -2, again, faculty, and the elasticity of the lunch crowd, the students, -4, and setting marginal cost equal to 6 yields. So we've got, again, 1 minus 4 over -4 equals 6, and now we can just solve for the price for the lunch crowd. Just doing a little bit of math there, multiplying both sides by 4/3. So the lunchtime crowd, therefore, should be charged $8 based, again, on this information that we have at the pizzeria. And the dinner crowd should be charged, in this case, multiply both sides by 2, gets us to $12. So faculty will be charged $12 and lunch crowd will be charged $8. Again, the prices are derived using that simple pricing rule that we derived in the first part of the chapter for monopolies. So this assumes that the pizzeria is a monopoly. To maximize profits, you should price a pizza on the lunch menu at $8 and a pizza on the dinner menu at $12. Since students have more elastic demand for pizza than do faculty members, they should be charged a lower price to maximize profits. All right, so price discrimination is, again, one way that firms can extract consumer surplus, but it's not the only way. So let's look at this other pricing scheme. It's called two-part pricing. With two-part pricing, a firm charges a fixed fee for the right to purchase goods and then a per unit charge for each unit purchase. Golf courses and gyms typically charge a fixed initiation fee plus a charge, either per month or per visit using the facilities. You can look at Netflix. Netflix has a monthly charge. They don't have a per unit charge for the content that's viewed because the marginal cost of producing that content is 0. And so they basically use this same type of pricing scheme, and that's how they're able to figure out how much folks are able to pay for that monthly fee, which is to calculate the consumer surplus, which we'll look at right now. So consider the following firm with market power. Again, here's their demand, here's their marginal revenue, less than demand, and we're going to assume marginal cost is constant and equal to average cost. The inverse demand function is P equals 10 minus Q, and the cost function is equal to 2Q. If the firm adopted a pricing strategy of charging a single price to all consumers, the profit maximizing level of output would happen at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So you're going to have Q equals 4, and then the profit maximizing price would be how much people are willing to pay for 4 units, which is $6. The firm's profits would, of course, be the difference between the price they charged and the average cost of producing times the amount that they sell. So the area of this rectangle represents the profits. In this case, it is $16. In that scenario where the firm just has that standard approach to maximizing profits, there will be consumer surplus. So the area of this triangle here, representing all the excess willingness to pay by consumers, is equal to $8. Like first-degree price discrimination, two-part pricing allows a firm to extract all consumer surplus from consumers. All right, so the demand function here is of a single individual and firm using the following pricing scheme. They're going to charge a fixed fee of $32 that gives the consumer the right to buy the product at a per unit charge of $2. With a per unit charge of $2, the consumer will purchase 8 units and receive a consumer surplus of the area of this triangle, all the consumer surplus at a price of $2, which is equal to the height of the triangle, the difference between the choke price and the price being charged, so 10 minus 2, the base of the triangle, which is equal to 8 in this case, times 1/2, because we're looking at the area of a triangle, so the total consumer surplus in this case would be equal to $32. And of course, they charge that fee, and so that is equal to profits. That is all profits for them. So by charging a fixed fee of $32, the firm extracts all of the consumer surplus. The firm sells each unit at its marginal cost of $2 and thus makes no profit on each unit sold at that price. So once the total consumer surplus is extracted, then they make no additional profit. But again, that is basically the amount of profit that they could earn in the market. So the $32 is pure profit, and it winds up being higher than if they just took the standard approach, which by the simple pricing rule that we've been talking about would yield them only $16 in profit. So again, the two-part pricing strategy allows them to extract all consumer surplus. All right, so just summing it up, in a principle, two-part pricing, a firm can enhance profits by engaging in two-part pricing, charge a per unit price that equals marginal cost, plus a fixed fee equal to the consumer surplus each consumer receives at the per unit price. Notice that if the marginal cost is low, the optimal per unit fee will be low as well. So again, if marginal cost is low, then the optimal per unit fee will be low as well, because again, price is being set equal to marginal cost for the per unit fees. So this could be the Netflix case. So in the extreme case where marginal cost is equal to 0, a firm's profit maximizing two-part pricing strategy will be to charge $0 for each visit, but a fixed initiation fee equal to a consumer surplus. So basically, the area of this entire triangle can be extracted as consumer surplus, and it is the fixed fee. You can also think about like Costco and other type of clubs, like those that charge a fixed fee to be able to enter the place to buy things at a reduced price, calculating their monthly or yearly membership using this approach, using two-part pricing as well. So with two-part pricing, all profits are derived from the fixed fee. Setting the per unit fee equal to marginal cost ensures that the surplus is as large as possible, thus allowing the largest fixed fee consistent with maximizing profits. Quick demonstration problem to highlight how this works. So suppose the total monthly demand for golf services is represented by this inverse demand function, P equals 20 minus Q. The marginal cost to the firm of each round is equal to $1. If this demand function is based on the individual demand of 10 golfers, what is the optimal two-part pricing strategy for this golf services firm. All right, so basically, again, we're going to do the two-part pricing thing. We're going to figure out the fixed fee, and then we're going to look at how much profit the firm will earn. So remember, the marginal cost to the firm of each round is equal to $1. The optimal per unit charge is marginal cost, so they'll set price equal to marginal cost. So setting price equal to marginal cost, we can then see how many people are willing to buy at that price. So plugging in 1 for P, and then subtracting that from 20, we get 19 for the quantity demanded at a price of $1. So that means that at that price, 19 rounds of golf will be played each month. The total consumer surplus received by all 10 golfers at this price is calculated how you would calculate a consumer surplus by, again, thinking about the area of that triangle that is made up of the demand curve and the price being charged. So you've got the difference between the choke price and the price being charged. So 20 minus 1 is the height of the triangle. And then you've got the base of the triangle, which is the quantity demanded at the price being charged, which is marginal cost. So you've got 19 times 1/2 gets us to 180.50. So 180.50 is the consumer surplus for all the golfers in this market, but you can't charge all the golfers 180.50. You can only charge them 1/10 of that. So since this is the total consumer surplus enjoyed by all 10 consumers, the optimal fixed fee is the consumer surplus enjoyed by an individual golfer, which is 180.50 divided by 10. So it's $18.05 per month. Thus, the optimal two-part pricing strategy for the firm is to charge a monthly fee of $18.05 and greens fee of playing golf rounds of $1 per round. The total profits to the firm are thus all going to come from the fixed fee of $180.50. Minus the firm's fixed costs, but that's a given. All right, so that's two-part pricing. Let's look at what's called block pricing. So if you've purchased toilet paper in 4-pack rolls, in 4-roll packs, sorry, or cans of soda in 6-packs, you have had first-hand experience at block pricing. Suppose an individual consumer's inverse demand function is P equals 10 minus Q and the firm's costs are 2Q. If a firm charges a price of $2 per unit, it's going to sell 8 units to the consumer. In that case, the consumer will receive this much consumer surplus, which again is the difference between the choke price and the price being charged, the height, times the quantity being purchased at that price, 8 times 1/2, $32. So that's the value of the consumer surplus here. The consumer pays the 8 units times $2, winds up paying $16 and gets that consumer surplus of $32. Therefore, the total value to the consumer is the sum of what they actually do wind up paying and their consumer surplus, which is equal to $16, the area of this rectangle here, the revenue, plus the consumer surplus, $32, which is $48. Block pricing provides a means by which the firm can get the consumers to pay the full value of the 8 units. Suppose the firm packaged the 8 units of its product and charged a single price for the package. So it doesn't give them the option to buy individual units. Basically, just, again, sets price and marginal cost there and sees how much people are willing to pay at that price, and then packages the units sold into packages of those quantities. In this case, the consumer has to make an all or none decision between buying 8 units and buying nothing. As long as the price of the package of 8 units is not greater than $48, the consumer will find it in her or his best interest to buy the package. So again, the price of the package will be based on not only the revenues that they can gain by selling the goods at marginal cost times the amount being sold, but also the consumer surplus that exists at that level. So again, because this is going to be their costs, then this consumer surplus that they extract will be pure profit. So it will be $32 in profit. So the profit maximizing price for the firm to charge for a packet of 8 units is $48. By charging this price for a package of 8, instead of pricing each unit separately and letting the consumers choose how many units to buy, the firm earns $32 in profits, the value of the would-be consumer surplus when the price is $2. Summarizing this approach, block pricing via this principle, by packaging units of a product and selling them as one package, the firm earns more than by posting a simple per unit price. The profit maximizing price on a package is the total value of the consumer receives for the package. Block pricing enhances profits by forcing consumers to make all or none decisions to purchase units of the good. All right, let's do a demonstration problem, then we'll take a break. So suppose a consumer's inverse demand function for gum produced by a firm with market power is given by 0.2 minus 0.04Q and the marginal cost is equal to 0. The question is, what price should the firm charge for a package containing 5 pieces of gum? All right, so we assume marginal cost is 0. So they're going to look at consumer surplus at that price to be able to figure out the price they're going to charge for the packet of 5 units of gum. So when Q equals 5, the price equals 0. When Q equals 0, the price equals 0.2. That's the choke price. So the total value to the consumer of the 5 pieces of gum is equal to the consumer surplus we see here, which is again 1/2 the base times the height. The height again being the difference between the choke price and the price that they were charged, which is marginal cost, which is 0, times the quantity purchased at the price at the marginal cost, which is $5, times 1/2. So we got 50 cents in this case. So the firm extracts all this surplus by charging a price of 50 cents for a package of 5 pieces of gum. So it's a pretty simple approach, but it's interesting to understand how these numbers are calculated. And again, it is all based on the demand and consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is a really practical concept that has a lot of applications and is, again, not just a means of me torturing. All right, let's take a break and then we will finish off this.